Welcome back, our viewers, to Pick Cipher. It's a podcast where we bring our leaders to talk about themselves and the challenges and they face in their journey towards a peak, and so that our audience can learn from it. And I'm still your host, Ayo, and with me today is Constance.
Hello, everyone.
So, welcome to the studio, Bukola and Winnie.
Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here. My name is Bukola Yusuf. Everyone calls me B. I have worked in HR. Gosh, I think I'm hitting the 20-year mark, which I know I do not look like.
No.
No. But I studied accounting at uni and realized in my first year that I did not want to be an accountant. And then luckily in my final year, one of my modules was HR, which I absolutely loved. And I knew I loved it because it was a 2-hour lecture and I stayed awake. So I knew I loved it. Okay. So I went off and did a master's in HR and landed my first job in a big investment bank and haven't looked back since. I've done everything in HR, business partnering, compensation and benefits, employee relations, early careers, development, learning, you name it. I've spent some time in it. My bread and butter is being a business partner. So I currently work as a global HRD, but I've dabbled in lots of centers of excellence. So I'm really keen on performance, really keen on development, really keen on leadership. But my bread and butter is business partnering. And I'll hand over to Winnie.
It's so exciting to be here as well. And I've heard your intro so many times and I still learn something new every single time. Yeah. But I'm Winnie Annan-Forson. I'm a head of diversity, equity and inclusion at one of UK's largest employers. My background is fairly varied. So I moved to England when I was 15. I'm a first generation immigrant from Ghana. Shout out to the Ghanaians who are listening. And I started my career in learning and development. Did that, then some HR business partnering for a little while as well. And then I made a very big move into the business. So I ran a retail banking region, actually, first of all, in North London. So all the Finchleys, Barnets, so anybody in those areas. And then moved on to lead 14 branches, deputizing for 26 across Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire and Buckinghamshire. And that's where really my calling into DEI started. I was very passionate about building a diverse team. Yeah. And there was a great opportunity to lead the DEI agenda for one of the divisions of the bank I worked at. And then it's just evolved into doing more of that for a few years now, which I love. And it's been a great part of my journey.
I think we have a future MP on our hands here. Our introduction was sounds good. I thought I was in Parliament and I listened to
I'm here for it. Yeah. I mean, if I were president, I would probably call and order that we all have fun every Friday. So I don't know if this is the right kind of politics you need, but we can make something of it.
You're not president. All right, fantastic. Thank you for that those wonderful introductions. Yeah. And we just start with Buki. Even though there's a question as you were introducing yourself that just came to my mind, and that question is, why don't we have enough diversity leaders in the UK?
I think that is a multi-layered question. And I think the data speaks for itself when we look at stats on diversity in the junior population in organizations. It's normally better, but then the further up you go, it starts looking very different.
Yes.
It's not particular to just race. It's the same in HR. HR is very female heavy.
Yes.
But the higher up you go, most CHROs, you start seeing more men. So the question then is, what are the blockers? Like, what is stopping the movement from people going up? And I think it's a multitude of different things. I think from an ethnicity point of view, you can talk about, whether or not people are getting tired of the system and starting their own businesses. There's a lot of entrepreneurship. So you see people kind of coming off the corporate ladder and doing their own thing. There's the piece about just being comfortable in the spaces that is supposedly leadership, right? Because you come into the room, if you're the only Black person, it's only so far that you can feel comfortable in and of yourself. So there's a piece around that as well. How do you change the atmosphere so people feel more like there's belonging? And when we talk about DEI, there's diversity, there's inclusion, but then there's belonging where people actually feel like I have a seat here and it's mine. And I think there's still a lot of work to do in organizations for that. Most people, like if you look at the FTSE 100, for example, and you look at anyone who's a Black leader there, they are fighting the good fight.
Yes.
Right. And it feels like you're running uphill as
Yes.
opposed to maintaining or thriving. You're just fighting the good fight. So, it's only so long you can do that for.
Yeah.
It's exhausting, I have to say. It's fighting against the tide. So there's still a lot of work to do, I think.
Yeah, that what he just said about climbing the hill and fighting is a recurrent theme we're getting from some of our BAME leaders as well, where they say the burden faced by BAME leaders is not just about performance, it's about helping others, it's about setting the right example so that they can get people in. And it's quite interesting that you put the dynamics into it, that why are people leaving and being entrepreneurs? Is it because they want to be entrepreneurs, or they've hit that ceiling and they said, I can't be bothered about this anymore? Is that?
I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah.
I think, obviously entrepreneurship affords more autonomy. You can do things in your own way. But I think it's also the frustration of having to fit this mold in order to exist. And so you're like, actually, if I do this and I can be me and call the shots, then why wouldn't I just do that? So the minute that starts to afford you, like, why wouldn't you, right?
Yes.
So I think that plays a part, definitely.
Okay. What is cross-cultural intelligence to you, and how do you think it actually plays out within organizations? What benefits would we say there are to it? So, yeah.
I mean, I think it's such an important topic because, as we all know, there's been a massive shift in focus towards race inclusion, which has been brilliant, I think, for the Black community, because we're talking about race in a way that we haven't before. Yeah. But I think what it's caused is a bit of a loss in talking about culture and difference in a really positive way, because if we talk about cross-cultural intelligence, it's about our ability to learn from, work together, and be in cohesion with people of different cultures. And when I was growing up, I went to an international school in Ghana, and there were people from all different cultures. And when I talk about culture in this context, I'm talking about nationality, I'm talking about ethnicity. So you'd have Chinese people, you'd have South Asian people, you'd have people from other parts of Africa, you'd have Americans, you'd have British people, and it was very normal to talk about how our cultures differed, how our food differed, our language. You'd be curious about learning from different people and their backgrounds, and it was very exciting. There was a sort of excitement to it. And I think over time we've lost that, because in the dialogue around oppression, systemic bias, racism, we've also forgotten the benefit of the difference in culture and the phenomenal nature of what that does to society, of what that does to business. We know that diverse businesses are more likely to succeed financially. And I think cross-cultural nuances are a part of that. So even when you have a room full of Black people, we might have different ethnicities. And even if we have different ethnicities, we might have different nationalities. If you have different nationalities, you might even have the same nationality and speak different languages. In Ghana, where I'm from, we have 56 languages. So I'm used to, even within my own cultural context, there being difference. And I think cross-cultural intelligence allows us to tap into the benefit of the diversity of society and helps us to just find more ways to find more in common and celebrate our differences a bit more. And I think to all the challenges B talked about, where people are not progressing because actually they don't find that belonging, I think we'd find so much more belonging if people embraced differences in cultural nuance.
So why do you think enough people within organizations are not embracing that at the minute? Because the reality is, and we've had this conversation on this show as well, it's not every time that people really want to come around and know you. Even your manager sometimes do not want to know you beyond the work. So they don't know what makes you think, or when you have challenges that other people might think like is a normal thing into in their life style. Why do you think we're not having that?
It's fear. I think, there is a clumsiness that comes with learning. Like if you think about a child learning to walk, they'll fall over many times and we just clap for them when they fall. And then they get up and they feel more confident standing again because we clapped. And I think over time, as adults in society, it's become more uncomfortable to clap, if I'm honest, because, you know, cross-cultural intelligence only comes through cross-cultural clumsiness. It's, I don't know much about your background. Can you tell me more about your background? I'd love to hear more about your upbringing. But we haven't been taught how to ask questions in the right way.
Yeah.
And so people ask questions
In the
wrong way.
Where are you really from?
Where are
kind
you
of
really
question.
from?
Yeah.
And that's offensive. That can be uncomfortable. And we
Yeah.
know that society is a lot less tolerant of mistakes
Yes.
now.
Yes.
So what that means is, instead of us embracing that as an opportunity to drive change, we've created barriers and we've created fear. And that's on all sides. I meet many people who are African working in the corporate world, and they don't want to talk to their colleagues because they're worried about being offended.
Yeah.
But then in the same spirit, we have a lot of people who, you know, don't want to talk to other colleagues because now they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. So we all have to open those doors. We have to be forgiving, actually, of that, some of that clumsiness. And that's a conversation a lot of people are not ready to have.
Yeah.
But there also has to be a lens on, actually, there is the wrong thing to say sometimes. So taking responsibility for educating ourselves is all part of that cross-cultural intelligence that needs to develop in all of us to be able to excel as a society.
So how can organizations, sorry, you were going to say something.
I was gonna agree with the fear about that being a barrier, but I also think there is a majority thinking of what normal is.
Yes.
So you find some African, and I'll use a personal example. When I first met Winnie, we both worked in the same organization, and she was so vocal about her faith and so vocal about being Ghanaian.
Yes.
Like, we'd come into the office on a Monday and we'd be like, what did you do in the weekend? I went to prayer meeting and blah, blah, blah. And I'd be sat there and I would have done the same thing, and they'd ask me, I was like, oh, I was just at home chilling. Because there is a norm that what do you do in the weekends? You go to the pub on a Sunday, you have a Sunday roast. So that is the majority. So there are some African people who don't want to change that narrative because they want to blend in.
Okay.
Right? So if you happen to have a manager who actually wants to find out about you, you don't want to share because I don't want them thinking I'm different.
Yes.
Right? That's when your hair needs to be straight. That's when your weekend needs to be the same as everybody else. You've watched your EastEnders. Do you get what I mean? So there is fear on both sides about finding out, but also about standing out for being different.
Yes.
I think. So I think when there is an openness and a bravery, then you have more interactive conversations.
How can organizations, you know, now you've just talked about this, there's fear on both sides. But how do you think organizations can actually bridge this gap, or how do they culture that environment that's safe for, you know, both managers or employees, or, you know, all around the spectrum? How can organizations actually step in to ensure a more cross-culturally intelligent workforce?
So firstly, I want to break down your question, because every time I hear that question, when you say how can organizations, straight away my question in my head is, who is the organization?
Is the people.
It's not one person drawing the strings. So I actually think the ask is on all of us.
All of us.
If you want a more inclusive culture, if you want a more open culture, then the onus is on being open.
Yes.
So culture is not, we call people culture carriers, because it's not one person who plugs in, here's how I want everyone to be. Everybody's contributing to that. So I get it. When you say organization, it can be a strategic lever that a company decides we want to be able to do this. You know, in other organizations, we've run campaigns where we have created the opportunity for conversations to happen, you know, created and curated the topics to ensure that those conversations happen. I think that's things that organizations can do. But I actually think the biggest step change that you can find is when the individuals actually think that they are contributing to what they want to be a part of. So I will take a leaf out of Winnie's book. If I want my manager to know more about me, then I need to be open to, you know, come in and go, hey, here's what I did over the weekend. It's a bit different, but I did this and I did that. It can't be what are they going to do for me all of the time, right? It's a two-way conversation. So we create the culture and we create the environments that we're in as well.
That's massive.
You know, thanks for saying that. A couple of days ago,
Yeah.
I think one of our sessions anyways, I know that we did talk about this. And I was talking about coming into the office and telling his manager at the time, or his direct lead at the time, okay, so I'm Nigerian and I do this. And I think we did have another opinion to this. And to be honest, I'm thinking in my head, if you come in as... come into the office and you're telling me, oh, I'm Nigerian, I had a Nigerian dance, I'm not sure how I would feel about it. Like, I know you are, but do I really want to know? You know, so I'm sure there are people that are also thinking in that space as well, because we did get that as a feedback. Like, okay, so not everybody really would appreciate that. Not everyone likes small talk.
I was just going there, and what I'm going to say, and which I said to the guest as well, is, so why am I interested in Leicester Football Club that you like, or that you had a Sunday roast, but we all listen to it? I said sometimes they even take it into the bedroom, what they do in the bedroom, which is too much information. So, but we all sit down there and listen to it. So why can't I talk about Nigeria and my culture and me going to the restaurant and having this kind of food, or traveling back home, having palm wine, bushmeat, and people are kind of like curious, what's bushmeat? And like, oh, can we get into the UK? And I keep saying, if you want to get arrested, we could get it. So I believe I'm in that school of thought. As you said, we need to promote ourselves and that culture so that people can learn from us. Because it's not every time that somebody's going to come to you and say, intentionally want to know, but it's not like you're going to come to their face and like, I'm Nigerian, look at me. But there are ways you go about that conversation that they know who you are. Everybody in my workplace knows I'm Nigerian and they know what I stand for.
But can organizations create that?
We are the organization.
Space? Yeah, we are the organization. Yes. But I'm just saying, how do we create that? I think it's a work in progress. You know, I think it's a work in progress, really. But
they don't veto what you talk about. Like, the organization doesn't come around going,
don't talk
you can
about
only
yourself.
talk about this and you can't talk about that. But I think where the organization plays a role is when you have really sensitive conversations. You can state how you want people to interact when it comes to politics, when it comes to, you know, those types of things get really sensitive, religion, that type of thing. But in getting to know someone's culture, or just getting to know individuals, I don't think that is a task particularly for the organization to solve. That is, I genuinely believe that confidence is a make or break for a lot of Black professionals.
Yes.
And if you delve deep into whether or not, I mean, for me not to come into the office and talk about my background, and for Winnie to do that, it was bravery. That was the difference. It was bravery. It was courage. Do you see what I mean? I wasn't doing it because I was like, oh, I can't be bothered. You know, I'm coming here to work. No one really needs to know. I just want to blend in, do my job. It's bravery.
Was that the same thing? Did you feel the same vibes from other people as well?
No, I think it was internal. I don't think, because Winnie was having these conversations and nothing was happening. It's not like she was getting demoted and I was being... She just...
Yeah, it's entirely
all I sensed from her was that she was proudly Ghanaian, proudly a Christian, and that she saw it the same as she saw the British culture.
Yes.
There was no difference. She would say to my boss, I'm going to find you a Ghanaian man to marry.
Ghanaian Christian.
She was like, I kid you not. And I remember talking to my friend. I went out to dinner, like maybe 2 weeks after I'd started working with her. And I was like, there's this girl at work. And she has no feel. I was really inspired because, and that's what I mean about confidence.
Yeah.
She was obviously confident in herself, in her background, in her faith.
Yes.
And everybody, I do not have a recollection of anyone acting weird or being, there was none of that. Yeah. So I think a lot of things are assumptions, and and I think the issue is there is a portrayal of this is the criteria that it takes to succeed here. Yeah. And unfortunately it's white, it's, you know, British, it's,
Yes.
you know, so
Yeah.
you might feel
Sometimes we
like
just wanna
if I
fit
don't
in.
fit
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
mold,
Yeah.
then I'm different. But I actually don't think
Yeah.
people are negative towards anything
No.
other than that.
No, to be fair, they're not
They're
even,
not,
and
actually.
you know, a lot of people fall into that trap. Just like you said, when I started talking about Nigerian food, they came to the
Ask
restaurant with
questions.
me.
Yeah.
They wanted to taste
Yes,
it.
Yeah.
They were like,
yes,
we're going to the
yes,
Nigerian restaurant.
yes.
They go home and they start talking about Nigeria to their kids. In fact, there's
Yes.
certain things that they say to their kids, and the kids say, you can't say that. And they come back to me and say, Ayo, can we say this or not? And I was like, it's the intentions behind it.
Yeah,
Like, you might not say it, I'm still
yeah.
being a racist,
Yeah,
but you're
yeah.
saying something, it's not even offensive. You're just trying to find out information. And because of the narrative, the society, like, you know,
Yeah,
the fear
yeah,
of
yeah.
you're saying something wrong
Yeah.
or
Exactly.
even... So,
Yeah.
And that, I think, to your original question around how organizations could play a role in this,
Yeah.
it's in that. So, because I always say there is systemic and then there is individual. So systemic is essentially, so systemic bias, racism, discomfort, that's because of barriers that have been placed in the context that make it difficult. So if you want to build cross-cultural intelligence as an organization, you teach people how to ask questions in the right way. You teach them how to have conversations in the right way. When the managers are getting a new person in their team, you provide an induction pack that helps them understand not just how to get to fire safety exit, but also how to talk to your colleagues in a meaningful way about their identity, regardless of that context. Because we know some of these issues when it comes to race and culture are prevalent, but there are also other systemic issues. There are people who can't talk about their children when they come to work because they think talking about parenthood makes them seem less committed.
Yeah.
Or there might be, you know, so these are issues that are systemic across multiple layers of identity, which is where organizations could teach their people to be more culturally intelligent. And when it comes to bravery, you know, personally, it's interesting hearing you talk about how you perceived me coming across that way. But as a first generation immigrant, it wasn't always easy. When I started school here at 15, some of the kids were mean.
yeah.
You know, but I realized very early on, actually, my identity is all I have. When you move from one country to another, all you have is what you brought, because you have nothing where you are. So for me, it was about the fact that if people don't receive me in the right way, I can't change who I am.
Yes.
That's me.
Yeah.
And I also learned very quickly that humor is a very important tool. Because I realized if someone's mean to you, but you make it funny, you disarm them because they don't break you, they realize, oh, that she didn't like. And I think that's why I'm so open about my identity, because it's actually a weapon. And I know that sounds really bad. It started out as weaponized. It started as weaponized authenticity.
Yes.
Because if I don't show up as my best self, I have nothing. Because I can't be you. I'm not you. I don't go to the pub ones. I'm not that. That's not who I am. I don't. So if I don't bring what I have, I actually have nothing to bring. And I also realized early on that if I can leave in a way that makes my colleagues more able to support someone like me, then I've done a good job.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I remember recently, so B and I worked at the organization I work at for a while. And for a while, we were the two most senior Black women in the whole organization. And now I think it's me and one other. So it's, you know, it's not great, but it could be better. And there was one young lady who joined the organization. And I remember her induction call. And they were like, what's your favorite song? And, you know, people were putting all their like 80s tracks and all the songs they love. They were like, yeah, oh, that's a banger. That's a banger. And then she put hers and she was like, Ashake.
Yeah.
And then she was like, has anyone heard of Ashake? And then everyone was like,
Who's that?
no, who's that? And I was like, oh, Ashake, yeah. So I made it an effort to be very loud about the fact that, of
so
course,
that she doesn't feel
I love
like,
Ashake.
you know, I have a weird
100%.
taste. Yeah.
And recently, I got a message from someone who said, do you know what? Someone was just singing your praises about how you showing up as yourself allows them to be authentic. And that was her. She'd just gone into another meeting and talked about how psychologically safe that makes her feel. So I think for me, there's a responsibility in that. Now that we're leaders, there are people who are looking at us.
Yes.
And we can't pretend we don't like ashake or eat pounded yam or fufu. That's who we are. And that's what we have.
And that's changing that criteria of what normal looks like.
Absolutely.
The more vocal we
The
are,
new normal.
the more people then go, oh, in my team, we've got Nigerian, we've got, you know, and it feels more normal. But the more we are quiet, the more the narrative is there is one way of being.
I think the only thing I've not been able to get them to do is to dance Azonto yet. So
it's not too late.
I'm still working on it.
Trying.
I'm still working on it. All right, this question is for B, and taking it into and you know, we had this conversation before, and I said I was going to ask on this show, and it's about feedbacks for BAME people within the workplace, and it's about how do you stop yourself, or how do you identify that the feedback you're getting is not racially motivated but performance based, because so often, probably because of what we've experienced in the workplace, once we get a negative feedback, the first place we go into is race. So can you explain to us how we can identify the difference between race-based feedback or performance-based feedback?
Right. So I will answer that in a slightly different way. So one of my really passion projects is around performance. I spent 3 years in that team, and I changed the philosophy of performance for a major bank. I'm quite proud of that. And I think instead of asking how I can identify whether it's race-based or performance-based, I think for me, when I talk to people about feedback, my point is you need to seek it out. You need to seek it out frequently from as many people as possible, because that is how you can authenticate what you're hearing, right? And a lot of people think feedback is from my manager, full stop, right? Feedback is from everyone. The gift of your peers, the amount of people that forget that they're working with colleagues who are their peers all of the time, that actually validates what your strengths are and what your development areas are. They're both equally important. Now, people always use feedback as a development tool, but actually it's a great way to find out what you're good at. So that you can shine at that. Because sometimes, I mean, Winnie knows this, sometimes the development areas will stay development areas. I have no interest in being a PowerPoint guru. It's not in my destiny.
Design.
It's not in my destiny. I will hire someone to do that. But I have the vision. Give me an Excel. I can do. So I know the bits that I'm great at, and I know how to mitigate the development opportunities that I have. So both important. So what I would say to people is, get into the habit of seeking feedback out. You cannot rely on, I'm just going to wait till I get my mid-year review, or I wait till my end of year review. That is not enough. When you work on a project, go around asking people. You know, when you've done a big presentation, it's called just-in-time feedback. Don't let time pass. You've done a big presentation, call up your mate and be like, you heard me talk there. How did I do? What do you think I can? And force them to give you developmental feedback. Because most people, when it's just like when you say, how are you? I'm fine. And you don't ask, they're not really fine. So when you go and say, give me feedback, when they say, oh, you did really good. What did I do that was good? What do you think I could have done better? How could I have answered a question before you asked it? Like, get really deep. Do that regularly with as many people. I think when you get into that habit, one, you start to, you know yourself. You then know your source, because you know if you're really good or not, because enough people would have told you. And then you can identify if there is an issue in the feedback that you're getting. Because if you're getting feedback regularly, and then all of a sudden you get something that doesn't quite sit right, it doesn't tally with every other thing that you've heard, then you can start thinking, oh, that's a bit strange. Is it because this person's funny? But when you're only getting feedback from your manager twice a year, if at all, because managers aren't great at this, I've done this a long time, no one wants to have the tough conversation. If you're not in the habit of getting that, how do you know how you're doing? I always tell people, you cannot get to end of year and A, not know how you're doing. B, not know how your manager thinks you're doing. And you only know that from conversations throughout the year. So I say to my managers, if anyone is surprised when you're having an end of year appraisal, somebody hasn't done their job right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the manager. The more senior you are, the more in control of your career you are.
Yes.
You should be asking questions. You
Yes.
can't get to the end of the year and say, oh, I didn't have objectives. That's on you.
Yes.
What have you been working
Yes.
on?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
What
What
did you
you've been
think your
doing.
priorities
Yeah,
are?
yeah,
actually?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Same thing with feedback.
Yes.
How do you know how you're doing if you're not asking?
Yes.
You can't just take it as an assumption, well, no one's told me I'm doing badly, so I'm doing great. That's not true. No one just hasn't cared enough to tell you. And then they wait till the end of the year. So I think it's important that we're doing that regularly and with as many people as possible. And when you do it, make sure you understand the feedback. So when they tell you, repeat it. So what I'm hearing is, I'm really good in front of the room, but I can do better at blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Make it into action points. Record it.
Yes.
It's a game changer.
Yes.
It's a real game changer. So the question is not, is it racial? No. The question is, if you're doing that regularly,
Yes.
then you can spot an
You can
outlier.
spot. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And to be fair, I do think one of the skills that are important to build is to be able to challenge perspectives or challenge hypotheses, and doing that in a professional way. So in a lot of the work I do see that people from underrepresented ethnic groups are less likely to get tangible feedback on their technical capability. You'll often get feedback on your style, your personality, and the way you
Yes.
come across.
Yeah.
And that's the same with women statistically as well. So we have to be better at asking the questions in the midst of that feedback. So if someone comes to you and says, I felt you were a bit vocal in that session.
Yeah.
Okay, could you please give me an example of when that came across? That's a very
Yes.
important question. Ask them, can you give me an example? Okay, can you give me a view of how that compares to the benchmark that we should be working to at this grade or in this role? So it would be, I would expect someone at your level to be doing this, this, and this is how I would expect to come across. Or you might ask something like, how does that compare to some of the talent within the organization at my level? You can ask questions around, can you give me an example of what you think good looks like? Because when you're able to challenge those perspectives, you can see very quickly when someone's making something up, if they're giving you an opinion that's not based on fact or a technical capability or subjective, or they're just trying to make you more like them, which is how bias comes in. You know, you asked about how race comes into play. A lot of people don't realize all they are asking you to do as a leader is to be more like them.
Yes.
And they might not consider the fact that be more like them has racial or cultural connotations to it. So we know that as I know as a Ghanaian, the way I communicate with other Ghanaians is different sometimes to the way I would communicate in the workplace. And we know that. So we should always be seeking out what the benchmark looks like. And whether that's through asking the right question. So it's not, what do you mean?
Yes.
No, the question is, can you tell me a bit more about what that looks like? The other thing is, when B was working in performance, one of the great things that they looked at was different capabilities that you need for your role. Many of us apply for a job and then we bin the role profile. Bring the role profile back. If your boss is not telling you what you should be doing to be good and effective in that role, the role profile told you before you applied.
Yes.
So you go through and you think, what are technical capabilities? Your technical capabilities are the things that make you good at your day job.
Yes.
So for me in diversity and inclusion, it might be understanding the trends in the diversity industry. It's understanding different forms of identity and what that actually means. What does microaggressions mean? Do you get what I mean? There's a technical knowledge you need to. If you're an engineer, it's how to actually build a thing or unpick it or whatever engineers do. Sorry, engineers. But you know what I mean? If you're a doctor, that's your technical capability. Then there's leadership capabilities. That's stuff that you need to do to manage people effectively, how you deal with performance issues. So that's a skill on its own. Then there's business skills and capabilities, how you're managing change, how you're influencing people in the right way. That could also be interpersonal. So interpersonal skills, how you engage with people, how you socialize, how you communicate effectively. So those are all skills. And controls was the last one, wasn't it? So it was, are you building in points? Governance. Those are 5 capabilities. So if your boss doesn't come to you and say, I think your technical capability in this space is lacking, which, spoiler alert, 80% of managers don't do that.
Yes.
You should be able to say, what does this look like when it comes to technical expertise required for the job at my level?
Yes.
And you know what? If your manager can't answer the question, one of the most important outcomes is you educate your manager on how to manage you.
Yes.
That's managing up.
Yes,
Yeah.
because now they know they can't turn up to your performance review and just pick things up from the thin air, because you're going to have questions.
Exactly.
So they come prepared. If they don't prepare for the 9 other people they manage, they will come prepared for yours.
Yes.
And you dictate that. I remember when I first started working at the organization, I had this manager, and it was early in my career. I think I was engaged. I was planning the wedding, and I just realized all our one-to-ones was about have you found your shoes yet? Have you found your dress?
Yeah.
And then 6 months later, we're having the end of year appraisal, and I could not think of one thing that we had talked about that was objectives related, feedback related.
Yeah.
And so for that meeting, I then sent an agenda, and you're so right. She came in prepared.
Yeah.
And I just realized that actually I decide, because the unfortunate thing is, if I don't manage up, I suffer, because then I get mediocre ratings.
Yes.
Or I don't get the best out of that relationship. So it's in my interest to go, we can kiki and we can go shoe shopping and all that, but we're gonna cover these points.
Yes.
And so managing up is so, the whole performance piece, setting objectives, feedback, the appraisals is such a tool. But we have been taught to hate it. It's, oh my God, appraisals again. Oh my God.
True.
We've been taught it is a tool. Because to Winnie's point, imagine if you're in a group of people and you feel like you should be up for promotion and you're not. That is the tool that you go in and tell me the gap.
Yeah.
You know, if you have a 5-point rating system and you've rated me a 3, tell me what I should do to get to a 4. You have to ask specific questions.
Yes.
They owe you that.
Yes.
That is their role as a manager.
Yeah, absolutely.
To tell you how you get from A to B.
Yes.
So I say to people a lot that people forget, like when they get the job, they're so grateful to be there. It's a two-way thing. And one of the things I've learned in the last maybe 5-6 years in my career is when you start a job, my job is to articulate what I need to succeed.
100%.
But we've been taught as Black people that you should know the answer to everything. So you just get it. I'm just thinking about how I'm going to do the best. No.
Absolutely.
Actually, there is a job of the manager to give you certain things. There's a job of onboarding to onboard.
To onboard,
there's relationships I need to have brokered for me to do my job.
Yeah.
So my job is to articulate that. Here's what I need from you to succeed. I need someone to introduce me to this. I need a list of your job is to articulate that. And then their job is to execute on that.
Yes.
But both sides are forgetting. So they're not doing it.
Yes.
And people aren't asking what they need to
100%.
succeed.
I'm not trying
manage
to...
up.
Yeah, I'm not shading anyone in my entire career, but this is the most comprehensive and logical and scientific-based answer that has been given to this question ever. And if you're listening, please listen to everything that she said, because it's almost like you're creating a control. You've created that control. So anything outlier, you said, anything beyond that you can spotlight. Where is this coming
and then
from?
you can challenge.
Yeah, and you can challenge it.
You can challenge it.
Absolutely.
Because if your boss comes to you and says, out of the 5-point rating, your rating is a 3.
Yes.
Okay, can you give me some more color as to why that is?
Yeah.
If they give you, it's because you're not showing up in a more strategic way. Oh, well, here are the 13 points of feedback that I got from the stakeholders that I collected that actually do say I'm strategic.
One of my personal friends would really, in fact, before this goes live, they would really need to watch this, because they are experiencing something right now that this will actually help them to navigate it, because I'm just playing that scenario in my head and using this answer in terms of also managing up as well.
Absolutely.
Like, why did the person wait to when it went really bad?
Yeah.
You know,
so
why
many
didn't you
people
just
do.
manage up?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And you have to take the emotion out of it. I think I've noticed this, having mediated lots of conversations when I'm dealing with people from diverse ethnic backgrounds. There is the emotion, because they've got so many examples of when they've been discriminated against or anything. So that sometimes overshadows what's actually happening when you get constructive feedback that needs to be challenged. But it's also, what do you mean? No, there's a way to do it where, to Winnie's point, the manager needs to come correct.
Yes.
Then if you're telling me that I'm underperforming, fine, okay. If that's your opinion, we're all entitled to. Can you give me examples?
Yes.
Rather than getting all het up in the emotion of how dare they and this is how they're always doing. Challenge and say, here's feedback from other people. Can you give me examples of when you're claiming that I've done? Can you, those questions? And again, not waiting 12 months to have this
down the
big
line.
dynamic
Yeah.
conversation
Yes.
goes a long way. So there is, and I need to make a plug because Winnie and I set up Accelerate Black Futures. I do a whole 1 hour tutorial on the performance management cycle right at the start of the year.